The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org radio, the weekly global alert news update broadcast throughout Northern California on KQMS. My thanks to KQMS for allowing this show, helping to get the word out. It's a commercial-free hour because we don't want to diminish the message. The times we are in are far too critical. The message is far too important. The news is crucial to understanding what's happening around us. If you think your reality is going to remain as it is for a whole lot longer, think again. Look around you. Don't ignore what's happening. You do so at your own peril. St. Thomas Aquinas said this: the more excellent a person is, the more he is prone to anger at injustice. Carl Jung said this: you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. We need people to actually help in the fight for the common good at this most critical time. And our society has been trained not to fight for the common good, but to simply go on about their personal pursuits of pleasure. That won't save us. That won't stop the ship from sinking. My thanks to all activists that are truly active in the fight for the common good. In today's episode, we'll cover the following issues, amongst other things. How vast is the U.S. empire, and at what cost has it come? How damaged is the biosphere, really? How bad is Fukushima? And it's much, much worse than almost anybody understands. How bad will the global refugee crisis get, and how fast? Among other issues, we'll cover these issues. Something to think about. How many people, and are you one of them, do you worship the God of technology? Do you think that that God that we've been trained to worship will save us? Or are you fully aware and awake and facing the realization that so far technology applied in very destructive ways has all but guaranteed our certain near-term global extinction? Again, this is a mathematical certainty if we stay on this trajectory. That choice is ours, but we don't have much more time to make that choice. We don't. Weather update. Northern California, rain migrated over us again. For those who don't believe that the climate engineers can and are migrating moisture right over the top of us, you haven't studied the science on this issue at all. Particulates in the atmosphere have exactly this effect, and when sprayed and dispersed with radio frequency transmissions to cause those particulates to repel each other in every direction, what happens? It makes a very amorphous, which is a featureless sky with very little wind, not much rain, and completely different than the storms that historically came across Northern California. I've experienced these former storms with lots of wind, clouds racing over the top, very dark clouds with features and squalls of rain, no more. Now before storms, we typically have one or two completely featureless skies in the days beforehand as the atmospheric river, which is in front of the storms, is aerosolized and migrated over the top of us, creating the largest expanse of rainless, toxic cloud cover possible. And that is, by the way, the goal of solar radiation management, doing unimaginable harm to the planet overall. But this is the geoengineers' quote cure for planet Earth, to try to mitigate our disintegrating climate by actually fueling the disintegration at the same time. So the rain has migrated over the top of us, and we will eventually get some rain, I think, as the rest of December goes on. We'll continue to get some rain, but it's not like former storms at all. We have the warmest ocean temperatures ever, the strongest El Nino ever, and the rain is always out there on the horizon. We get a drip here, a drizzle there, a few downpours, nothing like the historical norm. Record warmth in Portland and Seattle set earlier in December. So ask yourself this: how does moisture pouring off record warm oceans, passing over record warm land locations, suddenly flash out to snow as it gets further inland, even without topography. Yes, if it's going over some of the higher mountains, of course, we would expect colder temperatures and some frozen precipitation, but we're talking about astoundingly warm moisture for this time of year. And we see on radar, this moisture flashes out to snow in ways that no longer have anything to do with topography or elevation. It's just simply you're either in the snow portion of the storm or the rain portion of the storm. Do people forget completely that snow always had to do with elevation primarily? And we see snowflakes falling now at 40, 50 degrees. We even see the forecast calling for that. Does anybody question that? Shouldn't we question when our forecasters tell us snow will fall at 45 or 50 degrees? And I challenged our local meteorologist in Northern California. Of course, I got no response about 2 weeks ago when they issued a report from KRCR. And I sent this email to many other people so they would see this communication happening, questioning how KRCR would call for snow levels to drop 3,500 feet. This happened about 2 weeks ago, while the temperatures went up 5 degrees. Ask yourself that. That was their forecast. Snow levels were going to fall from 7,000 feet to 3,500 feet, while the nighttime low temperatures went up 5 degrees in the surrounding areas. How does that happen? No answer for them, of course. Not really a surprise. So as we press on in the weather, record warm temperatures again, record warm on the East Coast. How many people are watching this? Not just a little bit record warm, obliterating records. In fact, as of December 19th, over 4,000 high temperature records had been set in the week alone. In the coming week, we'll probably double that or more. Does anybody question this? We're talking about 30 degrees above normal in places, and that's the official temperature reading. We're getting readings on the ground that are 4 and 5 degrees warmer still than the official reading. The planet is in meltdown, and climate engineering is making it worse, not better. It's taking us from the frying pan and pushing us into the fire, if you will. Record warm Arctic. It's amazing. I still get emails from people raving that the ice in the Arctic is expanding. And whatever tabloid they're looking at, it's not grounded in reality. Arctic ice is imploding, absolutely imploding. It's wafer thin. The mass, the volume, which is all that matters, is at all-time record lows. There's only a thin veil of ice on the surface. It's now capping record warm waters. How long do you think that that's going to last? Greenland, record ice melts. Record ice melt. The amount of moisture that's come off Greenland, fresh water, pouring into the oceans, absolutely staggering. And that effect is being felt. In fact, Florida, again, I've mentioned before in Miami, pumping out every high tide. Islands in the South Pacific are already on the verge of going under in places. Did Paris address this, the Paris conference? No. The Paris conference was about backdoor deals to push geoengineering as the quote-unquote mitigation that would allow industrialized civilization to continue on looting, plundering, and pillaging the planet. And they sell geoengineering as a tool to be able to turn down the thermostat, no matter how much damage is done. This is a lie, of course. They can create short-term cool downs, but at the cost of an even worse overall warming. Anybody who's watching the weather scenario will see right now we have the exact antithesis of temperature readings in the lower 48 that we've had in previous years. We've had the west frying and the east frozen to make a lot of headlines. We have the exact opposite of that happening now. Shouldn't people question that? Meteorologically speaking, these scenarios are impossible without engineering. So again, those who think they can ignore this, think again. Won't be able to ignore it much longer. The trigger has been pulled. There's no going back. There's no going back. The planet's in free fall toward a different state, a very inhospitable state. I posted an article from Popular Science this week from 1958. 2 original copies that I have in mint condition, stating things that our mainstream media today won't cover. In fact, admitting on the record that as of 1958, global temperatures had already warmed 2 degrees Fahrenheit from Popular Science. Again, the article is warning the population about weather warfare. the technology which already existed in 1958. I encourage people, go to geoengineeringwatch.org and take a look at this article. We have photocopies of the actual pages. It's not a recopy of a text where you don't know if it really came from that magazine. Take a look. We photocopied the magazine. You can see it for yourself. So, again, we need to understand the history, how we got here, how these completely out of control climate modifications have advanced, expanded, and morphed over so many decades. These programs are now on a scale that can barely, or really can't truly be comprehended. To try to raise awareness, we have more geoengineeringwatch.org billboards that have gone up on Highway 101 in Rohnert Park, or stayed up in that location, gone up in Dixon, California. My deepest gratitude to the activists that have helped this to happen, and all the activists, again, that are actually putting the rubber to the road, getting something done, moving the ball forward every single day. Activists that understand the gravity and the immediacy of what we face. So we're trying to get the word out on the fact that the biosphere is imploding. We're all subjects of a grand and lethal climate engineering experiment that's wreaking havoc on the biosphere and contaminating all life on Earth. What's mainstream media talking about? I better pick up the pace because I have a lot of ground to cover. Here's some headlines from our mainstream media this week, and how important is this? While all this is happening, I just described, New Orleans votes to remove Confederate monuments. Completely insignificant. Second headline, I'll only give a few just to give a taste of the idiocy of our mainstream media. Top coach gets the boot. Who cares? NBAer delivers his baby at home. Didn't need to know that. Expert decodes Trump's smirks. How could you decode Trump's smirks? How could we know what's going on inside Trump's head? It's ridiculous. In the political theater, not a single word mentioned in the so-called Republican debate about the disintegrating climate. Not a single word. And that is the epitome of human insanity at this point in time on our planet. We have a biosphere that's literally imploding from every direction. Crop failure, marine ecosystem total die-off. We have temperatures soaring off the charts in so many locations, and complete insanity going on above our heads, again, with out of control, very visible, obvious climate modification, and not a single word about the climate on the Republican debate. And I'm not picking on the Republicans. I'm sure the Democrats won't do any better, because it's all two sides of the same coin. It's about time we all figure that out. Another final headline, Donald Trump hits 41% support in widest lead yet on national poll. Again, as if it matters. When will people stop buying into the political theater that is simply designed to make you think you have some say in the matter, when you don't? When you don't. And even candidates like Ron Paul, who some people think are the outsider, the one who could really make a difference, he's not going to make a difference. People like that are just, again, thrown into the mix to make you think that there's some chance of breaking the system. No chance. And even Ron Paul, who I saw him this week make the statement that if the U.S. simply stopped spending money on overseas wars, which of course I don't support, but that somehow everything would be well. We'd bring that money back to America, everybody would have jobs and be living it up. That's total delusion. Total delusion. It doesn't matter how much money you print. When the biosphere stops producing, that's the end of the party. The party is over at that point. Now, we know from a new poll, terrorism is the top concern for U.S. citizens. Again, that's what they are programmed to believe should be their top concern. They're not concerned about the fact that on the current course, the biosphere will not support life much longer. They're simply concerned about terrorism, which I recognize exists, but shouldn't we recognize that much of that terrorism has been created and fueled by our own government, and not just by them creating, spawning, fueling, funding, arming ISIS and that sort of thing. When our drones are bombing wedding parties, which they did, by the way, in one incident killed 50 at a wedding party, bombing hospitals, killing civilians. These sanctions against Iraq are estimated to have killed about 500,000 children, to which Madeleine Albright, former administration personnel, stated on the record she thought that price was worth it. Astoundingly enough, she said that on the record and on a camera. When we're doing that, is that going to make people in some of these countries like us? I think not. When they know that we're there for their resources, they know that. And this is what it's all about. So the bottom line is, of course, terrorism is the top concern based on the kind of programming that's happened. Interesting, in between some of the mainstream media nonsense that I see, I watched a Cadillac commercial, and this is indicative of what we're trained to want or believe. And the Cadillac commercial says, opportunity never sleeps, as if we should always be on the quest for more stuff, that's all that matters. To acquire enough money so you can buy a Cadillac and be a part of the materialistic nightmare that is killing our planet. Let's look at some real headlines now. These are real headlines on the collapsing economy. Just a few from many. Toshiba to cut 7,000 jobs. Volkswagen to shed 600 more jobs at German plant, which they've already let go of a great many there. Oil hits 11-year lows as glut worsens. And by the way, Saudi Arabia is still producing at full speed in an attempt to break the back of the oil-producing nations that are targets of Western power structures. Saudi Arabia is joined at the hip with Washington. Saudi Arabia, who beheads people for the most meager of crimes, even questioning the monarchy there, they're beheaded and hung from cranes. This recently happened. And this is our ally. We don't hear anything about this, do we? And as I mentioned before, who got a free plane ride back after 9/11 with no interrogations whatsoever? 93 Saudi nationals. What a surprise. As I mentioned last week, who's gotten millions of dollars in gifts from the Saudis? Barack and Michelle Obama. What a surprise. And don't think that Bush isn't part of this as well. He is. The Bushes and the House of Saud, there are books about that connection. So they're all part of the same. Again, oil below $35 a barrel. In Canada, some of their very undesirable thick crude oil is selling for $20 a barrel. This is a sign of global economic collapse as well. And just one more headline, so that people understand that when we go into some of these supermarkets that are selling shrimp, that those shrimp are sold and peeled by slaves. In fact, here's a headline: global supermarkets selling shrimp peeled by slaves. A small excerpt from this headline, just so we understand the price that people around the globe are paying so that life can seem normal here as long as possible. Every morning at 2 a.m., they heard a kick at the door and a threat: get up or get beaten. For the next 16 hours, number 31, these are the people that we're referring to in this article, and his wife stood in the factory that owned them with their aching hands in ice water. They ripped the guts, heads, tails, and shells off shrimp bound for overseas markets, including grocery stores and all-you-can-eat buffets across the United States. People here don't question who's paying the price for our lifestyles right now. We've been trained to think it's some sort of entitlement, that we have a birthright to this. We have the lifestyle we have because it's come at the end of the barrel of a gun because of the size of our military around the globe, and that's just a simple fact. I salute our military brothers and sisters who have joined with good intentions, but I now challenge you, if you truly, truly are trying to stand on an honorable commitment to your fellow Americans, you have to take a good hard look at what you're being used for. To add credence to what I've mentioned before, the crashing global economy, and this is a brand new headline. This is not a headline I've repeated in recent weeks because it keeps going lower. Baltic Dry Index, again, which is all global dry shipping, the most untarnished economic indicator of all. Headline: Baltic Dry Index crashes to new record low as China, quote, demand is collapsing. Small excerpt from this headline. Despite a brief dead cat bounce in late November, which Jim Cramer heralded as evidence of stabilization in China, which was clearly wrong, the world's best-known freight index has collapsed to new all-time record lows. Again, it keeps breaking the record. Amid a persistent glut of ships and ongoing concerns about Chinese steel imports, the Baltic Dry Index has tumbled to 471. That's the lowest level in 30 years. Do you believe the economy is getting better? Because if you believe that, you're not looking very closely at reality. One more headline. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does very little to protect fish and wildlife. Small excerpt from that headline. Of 88,000 actions and developments considered potentially threatening to the nation's endangered species over the past 7 years, not one has been halted by the U.S. government. Think about that. Of 88,000 actions taken, not one has been halted by the U.S. government. A new study has found the basic philosophy of industrialized society is that nature has no value. This is no longer from the article. I'm simply summarizing here. Nature has no value unless it can be looted, plundered, and pillaged in some way, unless it can be ground up into cash. We're about to find out what a blind mindset that truly is. No nature, no people. Very, very simple equation. Final headline, LA shuts schools. New York City stays open. We all saw the LA school shutdowns. How in the world can this be prevented when a single phone call, after the kind of event that happened in San Bernardino happened, when a single phone call threatening schools can cause this kind of a shutdown? How long do you think our society can function that way? And I'm not necessarily blaming those people who shut the schools down. They're concerned about the kids, and perhaps they should be. But when we see the kind of events that happened in San Bernardino and the evidence that indicates there was some knowledge of that potential happening with those particular people, what are we to think? What are we to think? And when we get back to 9/11 and we know what that's about, if anybody who cares to look at if anybody cares to search, re-examine 9/11 and see what almost 2,500 architects and engineers have to say about the official story, there's a big odor here. Again, we have John McCain standing with the terrorists, the ISIS people. I've been over this in recent shows. Connect the dots. This is what they want. The more disrupted a society is, the easier they are to control. That simple. A little quote from Fox News here this week. I'm not picking on Fox. They're all bad, although Fox really is the worst of all. Fox News said, "We, the U.S., have nothing to do with terrorism." Now, it's right off Fox News. Now, again, when our drones are bombing wedding parties, invading, toppling countries all over the Middle East, how can he make such a statement? That's so incredibly ridiculous. Going back even to Central America, the death squads there, run by John Bolton, who is a regular commentator on Fox. Look up his name and look up what he was involved with. To protect U.S., quote, corporate interests, he was involved with death squads in Central America to protect U.S. interests. I wonder why people hate us. So, on Fox News, again, after making the statement, we have nothing to do with terrorism, they go on to say that the government should have the right to surveil all communications here. How convenient. Create the terrorist issue and use it as a pretext to surveil every single one of us. This is heading a very clear direction. I hope everybody is waking up to this and helping us to spread the word. Rapidly increasing global tensions. Again, as biosphere implosion continues, conflicts on every front will escalate. Power structures all over the globe are becoming ever more desperate and dangerous. This is a fact. When there's no longer enough to go around, the law of the jungle will ensue. So a few headlines along that subject front. South China Sea controversy update. China conducts live fire exercises as tensions remain high. Another headline. Russia says destroyer fired warning shots at Turkish fishing vessel in the Aegean Sea to avoid collision. Little excerpt from that particular headline. The Russian Defense Ministry said Sunday one of its warships, the destroyer, too hard to pronounce that name, had been forced to fire warning shots at a Turkish vessel in the Aegean Sea to avoid a collision that it had summoned the Turkish military attaché over the incident. Tensions are building everywhere. It's going to continue. Another headline, Islamic State militants seize 70% of Syria's territory, estimated to number 60,000. Russian Defense Minister stated. Now, again, ask yourself how the U.S. military couldn't have squashed ISIS anytime they wanted, if they wanted to. We went over this in recent shows, that the oil supply line produced from ISIS was stolen Syrian oil, shipped to Turkey, Turkey allowing it, Turkey facilitating the refugee issue and flooding them all out at once to flood into every country in Europe. That's a NATO ally. who's pulling what levers here? Certainly Turkey's not going to do any of that without U.S. allowing it, at minimum. Ask ourselves what we're involved with here. It's starting to become ever more clear. Now, one more headline on that note. U.S.-backed Syrian rebel group on verge of collapse. The main Western-backed Arab rebel group in Syria appears on the verge of collapse because of low morale, desertions, and distrust of its leaders by the rank and file, threatening U.S. efforts to put together a ground force capable of defeating the Islamic State and negotiating an end to the Syrian civil war. Now, how do you know who are the good terrorists and the bad terrorists? How can the U.S. possibly make such a ridiculous argument that they're helping the good terrorists to topple the legitimate government of Syria? What an absurd argument. And why are we to think that, again, Russia can come in and really hamper the efforts of ISIS when the U.S. military couldn't do it? That doesn't even make sense. I know Russia has a powerful military, but certainly there's no arguing the U.S. military is by far the most powerful, efficient, effective military on the planet, period. If they can't get something done, they're not being allowed to get it done, period. And there's a reason they're not being allowed to get it done, because it's part of the plan. The U.S. military, again, at this point, is nothing more than a hired gun for the global power structure. I'm very sad to say that our military has nothing to do with spreading freedom and democracy. The wars they're engaged in are wars of aggression to expand the empire and secure the resources necessary to keep the cancer growing and expanding. And this is not to say that we don't have good men and women in the U.S. military. We absolutely do. As I've stated on previous shows, I'm communicating with some. I've communicated with an Army general in the past, retired. I'm communicating now regularly with a retired Air Force general. I've communicated with lots of other U.S. military personnel. Very good, very honorable men and women who realize what they were used for. When someone who's still in the ranks and threatening to sound the alarm on just how tyrannical the system has become, people like Pat Tillman, who, again, I encourage everyone to investigate, what happens to them? They get shot 3 times in the forehead with an M16 at close range. Look it up. That battle is ongoing. So how big is the empire? Let's take a look at this. A lot of things that most U.S. citizens don't know. Let's focus on Africa, because we don't hear a lot about Africa. AFRICOM's secret empire. AFRICOM is the U.S. platform for occupying Africa. AFRICOM's secret empire. U.S. military turns Africa into laboratory of modern warfare. That's a headline. The U.S. military already plans to expand its massive military footprint in Africa and elsewhere to the tune of millions of dollars and thousands of troops. This is from Washington. This is from mid-December. The Obama administration has overseen an unprecedented expansion of American military might on the African continent, with dozens of bases and outposts opening there since he took office. A November 17th investigation by Nick Turse, a journalist and American military scholar, found that the United States maintains at least 60 bases or military outposts throughout Africa. These bases, camps, compounds, port facilities, fuel bunkers, and other sites can be found in at least 34 countries. More than 60% of the nations on the continent, many of them corrupt, repressive states with poor human rights records. Not unlike Saudi Arabia, a primary ally, is it? Continuing with this report, even that figure does not fully encompass America's reach in Africa. According to Turse's sources, the U.S. military operates offices of security, cooperation, and defense attaché offices in 38 African countries, while 30 others have agreed to allow U.S. forces to use their international airports as refueling centers. Again, as I've gone over in recent shows, African countries have been droughted into total vulnerability by U.S. NATO weather modification programs, and then these occupations are subsequently allowed. Connect all the dots. This is business as usual. Bring them to their knees, cut off their water, or cause catastrophic floods, and then show up at the door saying we want to occupy. That's what's gone on. Continuing with the report, overall, TERS noted that, quote, the U.S. military has created a network of bases that goes far beyond what AFRICOM has publicly disclosed to the American population, let alone to Africans. The Africans don't even know. Think about that. Continuing, the military is slowly lifting the veil of secrecy over its actions in Africa, TERS reported. Quote, for years, U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, gave a stock response. Camp Limnier in the tiny Sun Beach nation of Djibouti was America's only acknowledged base. Only one, when there's so many there. Richard Reeve, the director of the Sustainable Security Program at the Oxford Research Group, a London-based security think tank, told TERS that the U.S. is using AFRICOM as a, quote, laboratory where it can experiment with different kinds of warfare and different kinds of posturing forces. Yes, we're all part of the experiment, no more so than the climate engineering. Think about that. All of us are part of the experiment. After years of denial, the Pentagon has slowly begun admitting to the existence of some of its outposts, with a 2015 Pentagon list now including more of the many locations. This newfound transparency is likely a prelude to even more military expansion in Africa and elsewhere. This is what empires do. They expand until they collapse. Thursday, the New York Times reports on a Pentagon plan to expand U.S. military might in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. No surprise. This is what all empires do. Under the pretext of, quote, defending against the group known as the Islamic State. Connect that dot. Again, connect that dot. Spawn them, fuel them, fund them, and use them as a pretext to expand the empire everywhere while you're beating the terrorism drum. And what was Americans' top priority now? Fear of terrorism. Not climate, not biosphere collapse, not anything else. Just the fear that's been instilled in them by those who helped to spawn that fear. Continuing with the report, under the proposal submitted originally by former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, the military would create a, quote, hub bases on 3 continents, expanding existing bases and cooperative security locations, then using those hubs to create yet more outposts throughout the surrounding areas. Pentagon officials told the Times that the hubs would range in size from about 500 American troops to 5,000. Those are big hubs. How would the U.S. feel if Russia set up a base in Tijuana? Would we go for that? I don't think so. Think about this. Think about why people are so hostile toward what America is doing around the globe. There's a reason for that. And I'm begging our brothers and sisters in arms to realize what they're being used for. They have an obligation. Their orders are not just to follow, or their obligation is not just to follow orders blindly. It's to actually question what you're doing. If you're asked to do something immoral, you have an obligation to refuse that order. Final part of this report. In his examination of the plan, Dan Wright questioned, quote, whether or not support for such adventurism can be found in a nation whose population is exhausted and frustrated by a decade of military blunders and failures. This is what's happening around the globe. Collapse is imminent. This is what happens to empires. It's what's always happened. No empire has ever succeeded. And the American population has all too willingly helped to accommodate that empire. They were pacified with lots of material stuff, like the Cadillac commercial I mentioned earlier that states, opportunity never sleeps. Again, as if our life should be about pursuing material wealth at any cost. And we are trained this way. Again, to watch the commercials around Christmas, which is simply another distraction. I'm not trying to take away from the meaning that the holiday is supposed to carry, but that meaning has been certainly tainted beyond belief, because to watch any of this, the goings-on to do with this holiday, it simply looks like a massive material party of acquisition and profit-making and so forth, and it shouldn't be about that. But just as the Cadillac commercial indicated, opportunity never sleeps, as if we're supposed to always be striving for this material wealth at any cost. This paradigm is not going to continue. No matter how much people don't want to believe that, it's not going to happen. It's very simple to figure this out. You can't expand perpetually on a finite planet with finite resources and think you can do things like playing God with the weather. That's exactly what's happening in our skies. And how many people ignore it? This is truly mind-numbing. Truly mind-numbing. And even people in academia, the so-called experts who say climate engineering isn't happening because there's no peer-reviewed report that would be approved by the establishment to say it is. Of course the establishment is not going to issue such a report. And the establishment does control all the major science publications as well as all major media so that they can put out whatever message they want. Messages like Saddam Hussein has WMD, or Saddam Hussein has something to do with 9/11, or that buildings collapse from some furniture burning in the first store, steel structure high-rise buildings like Building 7, or that, let's go back a long way, or that President Kennedy could get shot from behind and his head flies backwards. And in fact, they were so telling us the truth on that one, they still haven't released the records after over 50 years. Wake up. People need to wake up. So let's go on now to a very big issue that has been very well hidden from the U.S. population, who has convinced themselves that everything is now fine when it's anything but. How about declassified U.S. government report prepared a week after Fukushima accident declared 100% of the total spent fuel was released to the atmosphere from Unit 4. And we weren't told. We weren't told that there was such a massive release of radiation, that meltdowns were already occurring, and they have lied to us about that. And the amount of radiation that's been released into the atmosphere is absolutely staggering. Let's continue with this report. Again, while we're watching Republican debate or the Democratic debate, the political theater of stupidity that doesn't make any difference which side of the coin, not a mention about Fukushima, not a mention about the imploding climate. Americans and populations around the globe are asleep at the wheel. I want to continue with this report. We reported in 2011, this is from Washington blog report, reported in 2011 that the International Atomic Energy Agency knew within weeks that Fukushima had melted down, but failed and refused to tell the public. The same year, we reported that the U.S. knew within days of the Fukushima accident that, again, Fukushima had melted down, and the public was not told. We noted in 2012, the fuel pools and rods at Fukushima appeared to have, quote, boiled, caught fire, and or exploded soon after the earthquake knocked out power systems. Now, a declassified report written by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission on March 18, 2011, 1 week after the tidal wave hit Fukushima, states this. The source term provided to NARAC was 1. 25% of the total fuel in Unit 2 released to the atmosphere. Second point, 50% of the total spent fuel from Unit 3 was released to the atmosphere. And point 3, 100% of the total spent fuel was released to the atmosphere from Unit 4. Think about that. How much radiation have we already been exposed to that we were not told about at all? NARAC is the U.S. National Atmospheric Release Advisory Center, located at the University of California's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. NARAC provides the tools and services that map the probable spread of hazardous materials accidentally or intentionally released in the atmosphere. And we weren't told. The fuel pools at Units 3 and 4 contained enormous amounts of radiation. For example, there was more cesium in the Unit 4 fuel pool than in all 800 nuclear bombs exploded above ground. Think about that. Were you told that? I wasn't told that. We certainly monitored this issue from the beginning, but the degree of cover-up is absolutely immense on every front. Every front. This is the cancer that runs our government, and that cancer could not exist without a whole lot of people helping to facilitate that cancer. A whole lot of people, quote, just doing their job while the ship goes down. There's no honor in that. There's no morality in that. In fact, that leads to certain suicide for not just the human race, the entire web of life. Now, Regarding Fukushima, another recent headline, Japan to consider ocean disposal of nuclear waste. The industry ministry will consider the feasibility of burying high-level radioactive waste from nuclear power plants under the seabed. A working panel said on December 11th, 2015. This is recent. And they stated that this could be a, quote, highly appropriate solution. What's appropriate about that? They're already dumping unimaginable amounts of radiation into the ocean, just flowing out from the Fukushima plant. Anybody who hasn't studied this is simply in the dark. And now they're considering burying it in the sea floor, and they call this a highly appropriate solution. How can you even call that a solution? The human race is out of its mind, literally. And we have a population that doesn't want to be bothered. There's too many new things at Costco. We have to wake the hell up now. When I was a kid, and I would go to the quote, landfill in Southern California with my father, watching the D9s and D11s, these massive caterpillars pushing around. It certainly wasn't a landfill. It was a mountain, a rapidly growing mountain of trash. And I was, even as a young boy, I was baffled by this. I was baffled that such a thing could even happen. Who thought of this? What kind of solution was that? Let's build a mountain out of our trash, and when we get this mountain built, we'll move somewhere else and build another mountain. I've always been baffled by such things. And now we have, this is an appropriate solution to bury highly nuclear radioactive material in the seabed when everything's already dying in the ocean. We're not living with sanity. We're dealing with governments, agencies, administrations that have so abandoned any sense of morality that their behavior can only be categorized as insane and leading to certain species extinction if it continues. Now, how can Japan possibly, for example, let's take this a little further, how can Japan possibly host the next Olympics? How is that possible with this kind of radiation around? The fact that this is so far being allowed should be, again, shocking to all. Anyone that really knows anything about the Fukushima problem would understand this is the epitome of insanity. That in actuality, Tokyo should be evacuated. We have radiation there that's off the scale and getting worse by the day. Fukushima is a nuclear volcano with no end in sight. No known technology to fix the problem. We have 3 full-blown meltdowns. This is China syndrome for any who saw the movie or understand the term. There is no known cure for what is happening in Fukushima. And back to the insanity that I just spoke about, in spite of all this, we have 60 more nuke plants on the books to be built. Obama's approved $6.5 billion to build 2 more in Georgia. Yes, insanity. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. So how could we allow, again, the Olympics to take place in Japan? Because that's another way of pacifying populations in regard to the true danger. People assume, they wouldn't allow the Olympics there if there was a problem. Massive, massive lie. From every angle, from every direction, our planet is being systematically snuffed out, and we are all participating in that in so many ways. If we sit silently, there comes a point when silence is betrayal. In the words of one of the most honorable men to ever walk this earth, Martin Luther King. And this is that time. Silence is betrayal. To allow all this to happen and not to help to sound the alarm is betrayal to our children, to all life. About the climate and the climate systems, all climate conferences so far, again, are complete charades. Smoke and mirrors. No substance, simply backdoor deals to continue the totally decimating climate engineering programs. To say that anything was fixed in Paris would be like saying we're going to fix the brakes on a vehicle that's already gone over the cliff because there was no way to stop it in the first place. Not with our current system. So what's happening around the globe in certain regions, just a snapshot of a particular region that most people would have never heard about, certainly wouldn't be covered on our news. A headline from Morocco. Dry springs and dead orchards. Sounds a lot like California, by the way. Barren fields in Morocco reveal risks of severe depletion in North Africa. Again, U.S. occupation happening there. Same kind of engineered drought happening there as in California. On a plot of farmland where goats wander among the weeds, two-story house made of stone and concrete looks out over what was once a lush grove of orange trees. Now those trees have been ripped from the ground, leaving bare earth and dead stumps. Groundwater has been severely overpumped by farms in Morocco's South Massa region, and the water table has fallen dramatically, a lot like California again. When the family's well dried up, their farm was transformed into barren land. The orange grove's disappearance nearly 5 years ago eliminated the main source of income for the Moroccan family. They've turned to whatever work they can find, often buying and selling fruit. Earning enough to survive has become a constant struggle. A quote from this family: "All this land was irrigated with this well. Now it's dead." End quote. Standing beside piles of dry branches. Quote, "It's finished here." As the family crowded around their old well, they pulled back the metal cover. A rusty cable lay in a heap next to it. This cable, they explained, was used to lower people into the hole to dig deeper. They dug down to more than 600 feet. Think about that, what desperation it would take to lower people that far. And then gave up as water levels kept dropping. They could no longer afford a more powerful pump to lift the water from so far underground. Think about that. This is what's happening in places around the globe, not just there, in Australia, in, again, California. And we know, we are not speculating, we're not hypothesizing, we know scientifically with study that the aerosolization of the atmosphere will cause protracted drought. I challenge anyone to look it up. Look up geoengineering causes drought. This is a known effect, and we have all of academia not admitting to the climate engineering elephant in the room. How is this possible? Because they've been trained from day one to not recognize or acknowledge anything other than a peer-reviewed, establishment ordained, and that's the key word, ordained by the establishment who is behind all these programs, study. So unless or until such a study is issued, which it never will be, for almost all of our academicians, it can't be reality. In their mind, it can't be reality unless the power structure says it's reality, or until the power structure says it's reality. So in the meantime, we live under conditions that are so astounding. And again, back to the conditions in Northern California, which I know are the same in a lot of other regions, when we should have dark, moisture-filled clouds overhead, dropping rain. Instead, we have these featureless skies, very still and very hazy. It looks like a very severe forest fire is happening somewhere because smoke is a particulate. It has a certain effect on the atmosphere and precipitation. What's being sprayed from the aircraft are also particulates. And again, we're not guessing. We have film footage of these aircraft spraying military tankers. Anybody can see this if they go to geoengineeringwatch.org. We have photographs of the nozzles. And I realize that some people will deny all this. They'll say it's just condensation. Those aren't nozzles. Whatever people say, that's the official story. But again, ask yourself, what's the official story on Building 7 in 9/11, that a 47-story steel structure high-rise collapsed in 7 seconds because some furniture was burning on the first floor. Think about how ludicrous that is. If that was the case, again, anytime someone lights up a cigarette in a high-rise, you should run for the exits because the building could collapse. Same thing with Kennedy. Kennedy's head flying backwards when he supposedly got shot from behind. The data around the Kennedy assassination is astoundingly clear, as well as 9/11, as well as a lot of other issues, Saddam Hussein, the weapons of mass destruction, the no connection to 9/11. We could go on and on. The government lies. That's what you can be most sure of with the government. So the bottom line is we have these incredibly ridiculous, quote-unquote, weather conditions happening. Weather whiplash, sometimes going from 70, 80, 90 degrees to snow in one day. Hazy skies. If you're in a quiet location, all you hear is jet aircraft going overhead. If the skies happen to clear and you can see through the lower level of clouds, all you see is a grid pattern of spraying happening above you. How long do you think this can go on? And business as usual on the ground could continue. And I also want to remind people that in Northern California alone, in the last 10 years, we've lost 90% of the aquatic and terrestrial insects, according to a 35-year U.S. Forest Service biologist. How long do you think we're going to be here? When the insects go, how much longer do you think we'll survive? And everything's following suit. We see very few bees, trees are dying. It's an absolute mess. And the same thing is happening, again, around the globe. Final headline: climate migrants could dwarf other refugee flows, say experts. This is an article from December 10th by Lori Goring. Paris, December 10th, as weather extremes strengthen and seas rise around the world, forced migration linked to climate pressures are poised to become a mega problem that could dwarf existing flows of conflict refugees, experts warned on Thursday. Now, whenever they say could, think about that. That's like saying, when we know what's happening, there's no question about that it's happening, there's no question about the mega migrant issue being a problem. When they say could about something like this, it's like saying if you jump off a 100-story building, you could get hurt. Yeah, you could. In fact, there's no question that you will. When we have, as I've cited before, we had about 24 scientists on Greenland that took 3 years, these are all PhD people in Greenland. It took 3 years for them to tell us, yeah, the ice is melting and it's running into the sea. What kind of a system do we live in when it takes so many, quote, experts to tell us something so simple? On the climate refugee issue, there's no question. It's happening now. In fact, this process has been fueled, as I've already stated, in Africa, the Middle East, now in even California. It's been fueled and sped up because of climate engineering. And climate engineering is not the only source of damage to the climate, as so many people astoundingly want to believe. They want to ignore all the other sources of damage, and this is simply not rational. It's not rational. Again, it's like running someone over in a crosswalk and saying they died of a heart attack and you weren't at fault. That's not a valid argument. And I hope everybody starts to look at reality, because we have real and immediate problems, very big problems, and this migration issue is going to grow radically fast. And media is trying to hide it with a parade of idiocy that can scarcely be comprehended, like the political stupidity that we're going to see every day, every night, on every channel. That's what they live for. Continuing on this report about the refugees, we're way behind in protection and assistance to this group that we haven't even recognized the size of. The Norwegian Refugee Council said, speaking at the UN climate negotiations, last year 11 million people fled conflict, violence in Syria, Afghanistan, and other troubled regions of the world. But the average number of people displaced by natural disasters, including floods, storms, and droughts, has averaged 22.5 million. Since 2008, and is growing rapidly. At the Paris talks aiming to seal a deal to address climate change this week, quote, it's important to recognize in a legally binding document that this is a mega problem. But nothing legally binding came from Paris. Nothing. Nothing came from there. In spite of many people trying to get something legitimate done there, nothing happened. There was no public mention of geoengineering, certainly no admission to it, because they're going to hide it as long as they possibly can, because the public will go ballistic when they find out that they've all been a part of a grand and lethal experiment with absolutely irreparable consequences. Irreparable. So in the meantime, the power structure grinds on, trying to expand, occupy, and control people and resources everywhere it can. And this will only lead to our common demise. For those people who think that it's okay to go into other countries and take their resources, I mean, some people have the mentality of, how dare that country have our resources underneath their land? I've talked to people that have that kind of a mentality. It's a very twisted, narcissistic, selfish reality. But the bottom line is, that type of pursuit of power, endless power, will lead to our common demise, all of us. The power structure is not invincible. They are nothing more than psychotic, twisted, hollow human beings. They're extremely fallible, and they'll make more and more missteps in their ever more desperate attempt to retain their power as the ship goes down. And the ship, make no mistake, is going down. So what do? What do we do if we're caring fathers, husbands, and citizens of this planet? We prioritize. What did Mahatma Gandhi say? He said, action expresses priorities. Take action. Action that is meaningful in the bigger context. Action for the common good. It's up to all of us. Make your voice heard in this battle. Find out what's happening around you and help to wake others up. Again, until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.